Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. I hope the week has gone well, and I am grateful that you stopped by. I was at the Serena this morning for breakfast, and I took a photograph, and I'm not sure whether it's just a giant hibiscus or what it is. And I tweeted Ai Weiwei, who has this hashtag Flowers for Freedom. And then I learned Georgia O'Keeffe. Flower painting sold for a record-breaking $44.4 million. This is Jimson weed, white flower, and it's very beautiful. And then I saw another painting of oriental poppies by Georgia O'Keeffe as well. And she says, if I could paint the flower exactly as I see it, no one would see what I see because I would paint it small like the flower is small. So I said to myself, I'll paint it big and they will be surprised. O'Keeffe's poppies are among her most famous works, the glossy red and orange flowers exploding on a canvas almost 4 feet wide. There is no background to distract from their sheer force of personality. And indeed, they were very beautiful as well, and I liked my photograph too. Macro thoughts, I remain of the view that the dollar is going to rally much, much further. I think we're in a sort of flatlining period, but then we'll have another surge higher. And I wrote on the August 25th, I said, you see, in the old days, these conditions would have created a flight into the dollar. If things tip big, I said, the dollar might soar. Other big views about crude oil, I wrote about that on the 13th of October, who kneecapped prices in global oil markets. I called the US administration a price slasher, and like in the movie Psycho, oil has been sliced up real good. I said then the US has flooded the oil market and the commodity is now a geopolitical spear, which was a terminology used by Michael Clare and Tom Engelhardt. It is the US that is the new price setter for the oil markets, and this is a deep and important geopolitical development. The new price levels will have immediate and enormous geopolitical and financial knock-on effects. It will place intolerable pressure on oil producers, and we're already seeing that in Venezuela and Russia and Nigeria, good examples, and particularly those operating from a higher base price. I'll come to my view on oil in a minute. And then I wrote another piece in early November, the commodity super cycle is dead in the water. Home thoughts returned to my uncle Aziz, who in my first time at Westminster, when I was feeling rather sorry for myself because my father had come back home, he dropped me off, and the first weekend suddenly my uncle Aziz turns up in a Jaguar E-Type, with one of those open tops, and says, let's go to Hampton Court for lunch, and we did. And he's unfortunately in hospital, and I put up a photograph of some Jaguars at Kyalami when we were down there not too long ago. I don't like going to hospitals, frankly, because many years ago I went to a hospital in Bahrain with my dad and my brothers to switch off my mum's life support machine. Put up a photograph of her, and I still think of her nearly every day, in fact, and the little one makes me think of her because she's so similar. She has this extraordinary ability to, I don't know what you call it, which Mum had, which was, you could be everyone's interlocutor. She would be the calm, the storm would be around her, but somehow Mum was always calm, and Hannah's like that as well. Songs of Kabir, which reminds me of Mum and what I'd like to think happens to people when they pass away and you're close to them. Between the poles of the conscious and the unconscious, there has the mind made a swing. Thereon hang all beings and all worlds, and that swing never ceases its sway. Millions of beings are there. The sun and the moon and their courses are there. Millions of ages pass, and the swing goes on. All swing, the sky and the earth and the air and the water. Political reflections. I like this photograph tweeted by Doug Mills of the New York Times, President Obama in the White House. This was taken on the 20th of November. And then we learned that a woman with a gun was arrested outside the White House after Obama's immigration speech. Obama had started his speech some 30 minutes earlier. The executive actions eased the threat of deportation. Hoback said Lenhart was demonstrating along the north fence of the White House complex when authorities saw a holstered handgun on her hip. I wrote a piece on the 6th of October, which was called Current World Affairs, Fluid and Uncertain. And I said it was only very recently that I actually studied the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And Don DeLillo has written a brilliant book about that, well, more about Lee Harvey Oswald, but still. And what is indisputable is that geolocating Lee Harvey Oswald and then studying the head action of the president as he gets shot confirms that Oswald could not have killed him. It made me think who or whom can shoot a president stone cold dead and spin a narrative so effectively for half a century. It's a remarkable thing. Last week, President Obama accepted the resignation of the Secret Service Director Julia Pearson after a series of lapses. Just over 2 weeks ago, and this was written in October, a man named Omar J. Gonzalez scaled the White House fence and managed to get deep into the executive mansion before being captured. On September 16, an armed security guard with a criminal record was allowed to get on an elevator in Atlanta with Obama. Therefore, and I was talking about signals and the noise in this piece, is that, in my opinion, those were not really lapses, but very deliberate messages, and the president needed and needs to exercise extreme caution. The Kremlin, I think, have set up a Twitter handle called Sputnik International. I think it's a news service. And they quote Putin, "Color revolutions have tragic consequences and serve as a lesson for Russia," Putin said. It took me back to a speech he made at the Valdai Club, where he said, incidentally, at the time our colleagues, the US, tried to somehow manage these processes, use regional conflicts and design color revolutions to suit their interests. But the genie escaped the bottle. It looks like the controlled chaos theory fathers themselves do not know what to do with it. There is disarray in their ranks. I'm not so sure that conclusion is correct. I think it's proven highly effective in point of fact. However, as I've said, throwing Putin over and into Xi Jinping's embrace was, in my view, counterproductive. I refer to you to the triangle theory, I just made that up, US, China and Russia. Why be 1 versus 2? This was Nixon's theory, that's why he went all the way to Beijing that time, you will recall. Why be 1 versus 2, i.e. the US on one side, China and Russia on the other, when you can be 2 versus 1? If it is to be war with Russia, then Iran, this is tangential conclusion, will be rehabilitated as a gas counterweight to Russia. I watched Bill Cosby refuse to answer questions about rape allegations and order the clip not to be shown. This is APTV. The link is there, do have a look at it. It's pretty conclusive in my view. And what I was thinking, people like Bill Cosby, whom I loved to watch as a child, and it was so homely, and others, there's a DJ in the UK, I can't remember his name. There have been a number of figures who've been outed, and what is so upsetting is that they occupied this sort of elevated space in our heads from our childhoods. War with ISIS, a Catholic convert and a pizza delivery man revealed the disturbing face of French jihadists. The disturbing face of French jihadism has been revealed by a statistical survey and by the most recent horrific video clip from ISIS. The face is French or European rather than Arab or North African. It belongs to a young man from a loving, non-religious family who was self-converted to extremist Islam through the internet. Two members of a column of killers seen cutting the throats of 12 captured Syrian pilots in the ISIS video released this week were French. Both have been identified. Both are 22, both are European. One is Maxime Hochard, a former cinema lover and pizza delivery man from suburban Normandy. The other is Michael dos Santos, a French-born, once devoutly Catholic, son of a Portuguese immigrant family settled near Paris. And this takes me back to this point I've been making, well, since August, that IS and the likes of Al-Shabaab have proven accomplished and frightening and frightful exponents of the 21st century digital ecosystem. And as I said then, what is so fascinating and obviously successfully is that their media efforts all point west. The richest hunting ground for these new 21st century serial killers and terrorists is among the disaffected in the Western world. And those disaffected, what's incredible is this crossover in point of fact, where you thought it would just be the immigrant communities where you had people who were not able to make it in the West or for whatever reason felt disillusioned. And that audience was, I think, remains the primary audience. But then you have the secondary audience of people like this. And one of my O-level books was Albert Camus' L'Étranger. And L'Étranger can be translated as outsider, stranger, or foreigner. And in this book, the protagonist, Moisseau, is all three. And I think, this concept of outsider, stranger, foreigner is what's driving these folks. And though someone like these two Frenchmen, white Frenchmen, but I'm sure they felt outsiders in that society as well. Israeli security forces foiled an attack on the foreign minister Lieberman. This is being reported by Sputnik. And you will recall that His Excellency Avigdor Lieberman visited Kenya, and I took a photograph of him. So a couple. One with the foreign minister here, Amina Mohammed, and Dr. Kidero. I'll put that up. Currency markets, Euro 125.40, dollar index 87.63, Japanese yen 117.83. Most people seem to have coalesced around a 120 target for that. Swissy 0.9584, the pound 156.84. You remember not too long ago we were just below 160. We were above 160. Aussie 0.8625, India rupee 61.875. That's a 9-month low for the rupee. And that's strange because, when you consider India imports its oil, sharply lower oil bill. South Korean won 11.1330. Rial 257.30. Pound, Egyptian pound 7.15.18. And the South African rand 10.96.71, back below 11. I think it's a sell below 11. Dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart. I'm looking for another big break higher in due course. And due course might mean January, but in due course. Euro dollar 125.40, bounced off this key level of 124. If you go back to long-term charts, 123.50 to 124.50 was a major congestion zone. The question is, how long it will maintain hold above here. Could bounce a little bit higher, but I think next year will be at 1 at some point. Have a look at this comparison from Yahoo of Dow Jones versus the RTS. It really has been currency and market warfare, hasn't it, when you look at someone like Russia? You look at the currency and you look at the stock market. Commodity markets, gold back towards 1200 at 1193.55. I still think we're going below 1,000 next year. Crude oil 76.10, a little bit of short covering in front of the OPEC meeting. I think they're going to do nothing and crude will fall sharply again. OPEC watchers are more divided than ever. To understand just how contentious next week's OPEC meeting will be, take a look at the confusion it's created among professionals paid to predict the outcome. 20 analysts surveyed this week by Bloomberg are perfectly divided, with half forecasting OPEC will cut supply on November 27th in Vienna, other half expecting no change. First-time participants were evenly split. If OPEC does nothing, and I agree with this fellow, I think we're going to see this market get really trashed. Another $10 from where it is. He's on the money. Professor Steve Henke, whom I met in the late 90s, because I used to trade in Indonesia then, and he has always looked at these exotic currencies tweeted, Venezuelan bolivar continues to sink on the black market. Have a look at this chart he's put up there. Another example of currency warfare. Coming to sub-Saharan Africa, at the same time, with a remarkable lack of publicity, says this article, or media attention, the US has begun pivoting into Africa. This is Nick Terse who writes about it. Seems to know his way around the subject, particularly the US military. Americans know next to nothing about this, and yet the US military is now in one fashion or another involved with 49 of the 54 countries in Africa. Talking about how it's been expanding its presence in Africa out of public earshot, a string of small bases across the northern tier of the continent, staging areas, mini bases, outposts have popped up in Senegal, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad, CAR, South Sudan, Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, Djibouti. Chad seems like the natural spot for still another military compound. And I described this separately, but I said it's a very complex collision. I think China and the US are colliding in many places, and not least in Africa. And I said, if it's a game of money, then China wins, because China is the banker. If it's a game of using hard power, America's going to win it in the short term. And then I also have that theory that, the pivot to Asia, a sine qua non of President Obama's pivot to Asia is US-NATO power projection over the Indian Ocean in order to be able to achieve distant blockade operations, quote unquote. 168 new confirmed cases emerged in a single week in Sierra Leone's capital of Freetown recently, according to WHO. As I said previously, the severity of Ebola lies in the speed of infections, or what Virilia calls the escape velocity. Ethiopian Airlines says Ebola costs $8 million a month in lost revenue. For us, the Ebola effect is stronger than any slowdown in the global economy. This is Tewolde Gebre Mariam, CEO of Africa's largest carrier, told Reuters. Zimbabwe's First Lady Grace Mugabe has claimed she will be killed Gaddafi style by her political rival and nemesis, Vice President Joyce Mujuru, when her husband, President Robert Mugabe, dies. She, Joyce, has been telling people that once Mugabe dies, she will draw me close to her, and my secretaries told me that she will drag me in the streets, with people laughing while my flesh sticks on the tarmac. Mrs. Mugabe told scores of women cross-border traders this week at her HQ 15 miles west of Harare. And as I said previously, I think President Grace Mugabe is not tenable. It would be oogadoogood, or wagadoogod. But my God, very earthy use of language there. Her flesh being dragged on the tarmac, sticking to the tarmac. But at least she understands what's the type of reaction that would happen. I spoke about Ouagadougou's signal to sub-Saharan Africa during the Arab Spring, now in the bleak midwinter. Nearly all commentators spoke of how this North African wildfire could not leap the Sahara and head to sub-Saharan Africa. The reasons were that the state had a monopoly, and I mean incumbents, on the tools of violence and would bring overwhelming force and violence to bear. We need to ask ourselves, how many people can an incumbent shoot stone cold dead in such a situation? 100? 1,000? 10,000? This is another point. There is a threshold beyond which the incumbent can't go. Where that threshold lies will be discovered in the throes of the event. Therefore, the preeminent point to note is that protests in Burkina Faso achieved escape velocity. Overthrowing incumbents is all about acceleration and speed. Out of a population of 17 million people in Burkina Faso, over 60% were aged between 17 and 24. And I think there you saw a flexing of the muscles of the youth demographic, and what's clear is that a very young, very informed and very connected African youth demographic. Go and listen to that interview I did with that Swiss professor, because he sees Kenya as way across that continuum. Many characterize this as a demographic dividend, Wolfgang Fengler, my friend and economist at the World Bank, which for beautiful Blaise Compaoré turned into a demographic terminator. I said this is set to alter the existing equilibrium between the rulers and the subjects, and a rebalancing has begun. The South African oil share dipped below 50,000 and by 1.75%. It's up 6.52% year to date, but below 50,000 for the first time since the 6th of November. A record 1,020 rhinos have been killed by poachers for their horns in South Africa this year, more than all of 2013 and triple the number 4 years ago. It's really tragic. The horns are more valuable than gold by weight. Prices for a kilogram of rhino horn range from $65,000 to as much as $95,000 a kilogram. Put up a photograph of 2 male rhinos that I took in Lower when I went to watch the Safaricom Marathon. Dollar Rand is at 10.96.77. I think it's a sell, but you know, sometimes it overshoots. It could get to 10.88 or 10.91, so you've got to pick your spots. Egyptian pound 7.15.20. Egyptian stock market up 36.508% year to date. Nigeria, well, I was speaking to William of the FT and I said, what is a racing certainty is that the currency is going to give. Nigeria all shares down 19.1173% year to date, and just had a bounce, and now it's back down again, just 203 points above a 19-month low reached on just the 7th of this month. Before there was a good bounce, now we're back there again. Nigerian security forces fired tear gas Thursday inside the parliament complex as opposition lawmakers, including the Speaker of the lower house, arrived for a key vote on emergency rule in the northeast. And I watched it on BBC Outside Source, and it really did not look very good, and speaks to fundamental dysfunction and disconnect in that political space. You know, somebody else said Lagos is not Nigeria, probably Abuja isn't either. And you know, it seems raging insurgency, and yet it's very peculiar. But I think the currency is definitely giving. Currency fell 1.9% to 177.17. Naira has weakened 7.4% this quarter. It's all about they need a bounce in the crude oil price. They can't continue spending money to defend the currency. And we're in a Norman Lamont Bank of England Black Wednesday moment, I think. And I think they've got a policy-making meeting on November 25, and I think here they're probably going to raise rates. And I think there's a level an economy can bear and where it can't bear. And once you hit that level, that's a sell the Naira signal. And I wrote about this on the 10th of November when I said, turning to the markets in Africa, the Nigerian Naira and the oil share have been wagadoogooed by the collapse in the price of oil. I said a couple of days back, Nigeria might do a Norman Lamont, hike interest rates beyond the economy's tolerance. That will be a sell Naira signal. Put up a photograph of Lamont. Black Wednesday refers to the 16th of September 1992, when the British Conservative government was forced to withdraw the pound from the ERM. I think the currency heads to 200. I do not think the central bank has the firepower. Ghana Stock Exchange, that's up 6.2%. It's been on the bounce. This is a September high, and Madame Lagarde and the IMF have come to the rescue. Mozambique kingpin kidnap chaos, reads the headline in the Africa Confidential. President Felipe Nyusi surely hoped that such a problem would not come up so early in his new job. On the 18th of November, one of the most notorious and wealthiest donors to the governing Frelimo, Mohammed Bashir Suleiman, was kidnapped. He is the highest profile victim of the wave of kidnappings that has swept the country. After armed men snatched him from his own shopping mall, his family issued a statement confirming the abduction and appealing to the government to do its best to secure his release. Witnesses report that he was held up at gunpoint at the mosque in the shopping centre and taken away in a Toyota car with no number plate. Police who have mobilised officers throughout the city say 4 men carried out the abduction. We hear that the secret services were also activated to help out. This has actually become an epidemic in Mozambique, in fact. Put up a photograph of Maputo taken from the sea 900 days ago, and another one of the statue of Samora Machel in the Praça de la Independencia in Maputo. And I like this photograph. Although it's most famous for felines, this is the Serengeti. The area is home to grazing animals like the elephant, and it's a lovely photograph from BBC, a girl called Tanvir Badal. I'm going to put up a photograph coming to Kenya now of armed police standing guard outside the closed Swafa Mosque. This was on the BBC. Take you back to September 2012, and it feels like Groundhog Day, doesn't it? And I wrote then, my concern remains that what appear like uncorrelated spikes and paroxysms of violence conflate, become more broad-based and amplified. I looked at something I wrote in 2012, coast problems are deeper than riots, I said. And I was talking about how on the 27th of August, Abu Drogo Mohammed was shot on the always busy Bamburi Road not far from Pirates. This proved the spark that ignited a tinderbox, and I watched events then unfold with trepidation. We now exist in a 24/7 always-on world, and for a moment it looked like Mombasa was morphing into Waziristan, I said then. And nothing has really changed. I'll put up a photograph of the Indian Ocean in Dayani when we were there 325 days ago, and that's Layla getting up on the windsurf. Kenya's Mombasa port expects to handle 14% more cargo in 2014. That's a good sign. I'll put up a photograph of the sunset in Mombasa. And then it's a fellow called Abdul Aziz Muhammad, who I follow on Twitter. And he starts tweeting this. Let me just go from the latest backwards. The leader of 10 Al-Shabaab suicide brigade in Nairobi is a Swedish national, Mansour Sabri, going by the name Ralph. The main base of Al-Shabaab in Nairobi is in Westlands, which is, funny enough, where I am right now. Then breaking hotels, institutions, clubs, embassies and restaurants in Gigiri, which I passed through on the way home, are not the number one target for Al-Shabaab suicide brigade. Militants inside Nairobi has a plan to target financial institutions like banks. People dead at Masjid Swafa after police opened fire at youth who broke into the mosque for evening prayers. Sources identify the two Kenyan would-be suicide bombers as Lucas Njoki and Sadiq Abdi. 10 suicide bombers in Nairobi, 3 from the UK, 1 from Denmark, 1 from Sweden, 2 Kenyans, 2 Somalis, more to follow. Identities of active Al-Shabaab suicide brigade in Nairobi obtained by insider and sources. Al-Shabaab plans to carry out deadly attack in the US on the US or UK embassies in Nairobi. Those are very well protected. Unconfirmed number of militants stand by to carry out mass shooting, attack police stations in Mombasa. Up to 10 militants using 3 cars, including 2 Land Cruisers, planning to attack Western embassies and Gigiri buildings. So I can't verify, or I don't know, but he seems to know what he's talking about, frankly. Kenya shilling 90.05. Nairobi all share up 18.6022% in 2014. NAC 20 up 4.455% in 2014. Safaricom had a huge trading session yesterday, trading 110.578 million shares. We're just 10 cents off a record. And you know, when I went to those results, I wrote these results beat the street by a wide margin. I said the outliers, mobile data, 3.1 million smartphones on the network, and essentially we've had a strong price reaction since those results were released. I put up a link for an interview I did with Bob after that results release. Stanchart reported Q3 profit to pre-tax profit up 14%, but some of that was flattered with a property-related gain. But it remains very attractively priced. Shares are tightly held. Limuru Tea closed at a record of 1100. It's really a real estate play. Mumia Sugar has rebounded 35.71% since the 13th of November. ARM steps up expansion plans across East Africa, an article in Business Daily. They've really gone for it. Very, very good at execution. Margin expansion because of the clinker facilities they're putting in. I'll put up a link for their share price. Leapfrog Investments, a private equity firm backed by Soros and JP Morgan, has bought a majority stake in Kenyan insurer Resolution in a deal valued at about $18.64 million. and there's been a lot of activity in the insurance sector. You remember I interviewed a guy from Prudential. You've had Swiss Re come in, a lot of excitement, and once or every 2 weeks I'm meeting somebody from that area looking to enter the market. I wish you all a great weekend, and thank you for listening.